Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Has been going through the wine library because our great uncle was the president of it for a while, so he was the first historian. He wrote the first To Kalon history. It's like a couple handful of pages, and so he's been sort of an inspirational person in my pursuit of this. And he was just so excited about it. He was a lawyer. He wrote our first contract with Bob and Oshel. Finally tell that story now. But this is so in 1950s, Bob was interested in fruit from our area. He had his Charles Krug winery in St. Helena, and my great uncle found him like lurking around the house, like just walking the vineyard. And so he asked, he said, "Oh, Bob, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Do you want a glass of wine?" And Bob said, No, I'm not interested. He said, "Well, do you want a beer?" He said, "Okay." And so they had a beer, and what ended up happening is my great uncle said, "Okay, we'll sell you the grapes. It's let's do a set price for 3 years just to see how it works." And so I looked it up in his memoir, and it was $165 per ton for those first 3 years. And the very first year, there was like a natural disaster or something, like the yields went down in around the valley, and so the market value went up. And so our great uncle was pissed. He said, "Oh my God, I wrote a contract for 3 years, and now the market value is $200 a ton instead of $165. And we got the check in the mail from Bob, and it was for $200 a ton. And then the next year, same thing happened. The market value went above the contract. We got a check in the mail that was just completely different than what the contracted price was. So our great uncle went into Bob's office at Krug with the contract he wrote and ripped it up in front of him, put it on his desk, and said, "We don't need a contract, just a handshake." So I feel like that to me is when I taste the wine. I had this is a small Napa World experiences. We were up in town the other night, and we met some now friends, and they came walking into the house with a bottle of 1977 Dietert that was homemade by our great uncle. And so I tasted it. It was so incredible because it was just still so youthful. Like I would have thought it was from the late 90s, 2000s. This was homebrew, and it turns out that couple had bought the house of the home winemaker that was helping my great uncle. So he got sort of as payment some bottles that sat in his cellar for all these years. And when you taste something like that, it's the best descriptor is like it tastes like home. It feels like it's part of who you are. And those are the wines in my case that move me the most. And then it's just been fun. I love tasting through all other people's wines, all styles. Like I said, I'm not provincial. I love tasting different things, but it's if people live with passion, that's what makes it the most interesting.
Living with passion, living out your passion. We spoke about it briefly. How cool would I be if we all lived our passion?
And when me and Alex started this, it was funny because we didn't know there was no signs that it was going to be economically successful. with there's plenty of passion, but the other stance you take is like, so we decided to make wines that we like to drink. So it was no focus on pursuing prevalent styles or things that we know would be successful critically. It was purely, this is what we love to drink, and if we can't sell it, we'll drink it all ourselves.
Brave. Yeah. And what if anything influenced you from wines around the world that you have been partaking in?
Oh, there's so many. I'd say that experience at Mondavi, tasting the home wines for my bachelor party when I was getting married in 2015. My second cousins threw a bachelor party up at their house, and I was just joking around with him, and I said I don't want to drink anything that's younger than I am. And I thought he understood it was a joke, but then he showed up with a case of wine that was homemade wine from the family from the 70s and early 80s.
Oh my goodness.
And so we got to taste through this heritage of the site. And the funny thing about it is they're so special because there's not very many of them left. And so as we're going through the vintages, he wouldn't open the next bottle until we finished the last one. So with home winemaking, there's always a little bit of variation. So you had some great bottles, and you had some ones that we had to drink because we had to get to the next bottle. But it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life to be able to taste something that rare. And we also used to make this one bottle I haven't tried yet, but it's a home wines that we made with the Isley family, who they used to work with the same home winemaker. And so there's some 50-50 blends of our second cousin's Cab Franc with Isley Cabernet Sauvignon that they have. I think they have one bottle left, but there's always in pursuit of that. And then the other one of my favorite wines I've ever tried was a 69 Chapelet made by Philip Togny.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know that Tony used to be that winemaker, and I think I tried 74 once, and it was quite revelatory. So, yeah, all this rhetoric about California wines not aging because we're the New World, this is kind of blowing it out of the water completely.
Yeah, again, as a historian or amateur historian, it's that old idea seems like marketing to me versus anything true, because everything I've tasted, you can taste different styles, you can taste different techniques, but there's some of the most special wines I've ever had in my life have been Old California.
Wow, that's a profound statement, because I'm sure you've tried Old World wines galore. What would you feel, with respect to your wines, would be an appropriate, I don't like the term maturity gates, but I'll use it anyway, parameters?
Based on the family homebrew, we've got a long life expectancy. For me, the connection to history and to legacy, I've always wanted to make wines that go to distance. I want to be one of my powerful experiences of one of my friend's older brother was turning 21, and his dad had bought him pretty much the who's who of first gross, had splurged for all these great wines, and his birth year was 1982. So it was my first experience in wine. I specifically remember drinking the Mouton and just being like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, because I never had tannins in my life. I'd never had those sensations in my mouth. And so I totally didn't get it. But then they started opening old ports, like 1970s Grahams and 77 Dows, and I said, oh, these taste great with the sweetness. I was like, this is perfect. But yeah, no, for me, it's I think that's what makes it exciting.
What sets California wines apart the most? And yes, there's an obvious confluence of weather, geography, microclimates, but in your mind, when you taste an aged California wine, what are the hallmarks?
For me, what I love is you can see the innovation, you can see the history, because there's these eras of what's popular coming out of Davis or whoever the professor was at the time, and so you can see the evolution of an industry, which is incredibly powerful, and you can see failures and you can see successes, and you can learn from these classic wines, and so that's for me like the ultimate pursuit of tasting them, is being able to get a better understanding for what the prevailing ideas were, how it succeeded, how it aged. And in the case of some of these old California wines, I truly believe that they reflect more of that sort of American spirit of like innovation. Sometimes I love history, but at the same time you can be overwhelmed by having to do things the same way forever, which is exactly why I'm not trying to tell my kids what to do. So I do feel like that innovative spirit, it's like every 10 years, it's like the California wines are evolving and getting better or changing. And but it's such a risk too, because in making those decisions, you have to wait 30 or 40 years, which is the life expectancy of a winemaker for vintage wise. So you get 30 or 40 vintages to work on in your life. So you really have to think historically and taste those old wines in order to make present day decisions.
So it strikes me at times that history is a story. It's just an older story. It's an aged story. and it comes alive. You literally tasting history when you taste previous vintages, and it makes so much sense. As old soul would naturally gravitate towards historical expressions that have some age and are able to communicate things from a perspective. And here we are in front of a wine that's quite young, I understand.
Yep.
What vintage are we tasting?
So this is the 2016.
2016.
And I love tasting wines at this stage because I feel like you can tell so much about how they're going to evolve, and you can taste just the purity and focus, and it's a reference point. And then as it ages, one of your earlier questions, which I didn't quite answer, but every bottle we open of our wine from the first vintages, from the experimental vintages, every time I open a bottle, I'm convinced it's the best bottle from that. And they get progressively older, so I do feel like it's that's just an incredible gift to be that lucky that your site can go the distance and you can appreciate it for hopefully our whole lifetimes and beyond.
And what's really almost paradoxical in the best way is that your wines always taste fresh and youthful, even the aged ones that I've had. And it probably speaks to your philosophy as a winemaker, that je ne sais quoi, that freshness, that presence, that almost effervescence, not in the physical sense, but it's that extra that you can't quite define, and perhaps it shouldn't be defined.
Yeah, and I love wines that are reductive, like, so it's depriving them of oxygen. Oxygen softens the wine and opens it, and I strongly believe that helps maintain its freshness, because if you're too aggressive with aerating your wine, you're trying to achieve something too early out of it. And so I love the idea of a wine that continues to evolve, especially in the glass. I feel like with these types of young wines, you see that, where as you're tasting through it, it just continues to evolve, and every taste is different. And if it doesn't do that, then that's a true issue.
We have a visitor. Hi.
Just a couple notes. Your phone is off, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. The water's off.
I know.
Okay.
They can survive.
I'll meet you up in St. Helena.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll see you in a bit.
Slide.
Yeah, exactly. Family business.
Yes, family first. So if there's such a thing as a style of your wine, how would you describe it?
It's so interesting. I back to your earlier comment about personification. Like, I feel like the style is who the person is. So if I don't like talking about myself, but I feel like the pursuit is to have something that's humble, have that purity, have that reflection of nature. And to be honest, like, I have if it tastes too much like it's come from me, then I feel like I've missed the point. Like, I might determine the ultimate sort of pursuit, but I want it to taste like the site. And so for me, that's the ultimate goal.
Well, it's a noble goal, and from everything I know, you achieve it to the highest degree. So I can't wait to stick my nose in this. And I can already tell, even though the wine is really young, that I'm in the presence of greatness. It's not hard to tell. So I want to be kind of very quiet now, and just let you kind of guide us through this treasure that you work so hard to achieve. We spoke earlier about the romance of the wine, or a theoretical romance of what it's like being a gentleman farmer. And it's hard work, and there's a lot of things that go into it that I think tests you as a human, as well as a viticulturalist, vineyardist, winemaker. So what is it like for you on a daily basis?
Very humbling. As you said, I mean, everyone portrays it as so romantic, but I remember the vintages where you don't harvest anything, and when true disasters happen, and I mean, seeing the fires and the effect on the industry then, and it's not we're not making widgets, so we're totally dependent on Mother Nature. And I think anybody who tries to battle against her loses. And absolutely, all you have to do is be humble, make smart decisions, take risks, and always stay true to what you're trying to pursue.
So 2016, From what I gather, it was a quite successful vintage in the valley. How was it for you? What was it like?
It was exciting. So it was we had a 1-year-old in the house. I remember it's the first harvest that I ever felt like. Usually you're so tired because you're up at dawn, to bed after dusk, and it was exciting for me because I was already so sleep deprived. I felt like it was the easiest harvest ever. I was just like, okay, baby's up, moving on.
Yeah.
And as a vintage, it's one of the ones I truly get. You love all your children across the vintages, so I can never choose a favorite. But I feel like 16 has this like sort of depth and darkness, and it has in my mind all the characteristics of our site that I could describe technically, not ethereally, but such an incredible like earthy quality. And one of my favorite things that comes across in the wines year after year is this. We get it in the tank, which is like stainless steel. It's never not seen any barrels, and it's this like bitter chocolate. It's like this very pure chocolatey aroma that's just true to this area. And the other one I always love is, which is to me classic Western benchland Napa Valley, is the black olive. And that's in my mind an evolution of something that's very important for us, which is technically called a pyrazine, but it's like it's herbaceousness in wine, which is classic to Cabernet. And those home wines that I've been lucky enough to try, it's really interesting because they were pure pyrazine. I mean, these were like the greenest green bean wines probably when they were being made. And what's interesting about that compound, and this is my Davis education talking, is it's more stable than fruit. And so it has the ability to age when the wine has its varietal character. So some of this pursuit of fruitiness in young wines, I think fruitiness is very attractive, and it's what makes California wine delicious in its youth, but without retaining that core of varietal aspect of herbaceousness, you sacrifice longevity. And so what I love about our wines, and to me that black olive is a beautiful like balance between it being fruity and herbal at the same time.
So people that are kind of anti-pyrazine should take note that is actually a foundational piece. It's what gives it that structure. Yeah, and it's present in all Cabernets. It's not universal, but I think it adds freshness to the wine. And so the question of pyrazine is always balance. Yeah.
And so in our pursuit, I want everything to integrate and make a balanced wine. And so you want componentry of all these various flavor descriptors. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, makes a wine complex.
Yes, absolutely. And as you taste through the barrels as the wine ages, I wonder if certain barrels show up differently than others, that there's variance between each one?
Every barrel is unique, and that's what makes it so exciting, is you have, and it makes sense because you put it into a vessel and it gets to interact with the microbiology in that vessel, which is going to be different from its neighbor. And so as a result, you get unique little wines in each barrel, and it's fun to taste through because of all the characteristics. Then you get to decide, this is where the winemaker does show up, is which are your favorites, how do you value that, and how do you want to put them together. And in our case, I've always been asked the question, because people want to say, well, we want to try the 65-year-old vines, the 45, the 20-year-old vines like separately, because we would find that interesting. And I've never given into that, because in our family story is the history of the family and the multiple generations. So for me, blending the 65, 45, and 20-year-old vines together in the right proportions is what tells the family story.
Wow.
And the only bottling we've ever done of the 65-year-old vines independently is for the birth year of each of my daughters. We bottled them 5 cases of the oldest vines to hope that they'll appreciate the history and be reverent for the great-grandparents someday when they inherit their vines.
Wow. So if I may ask a technical question, is there a particular cooper that you're partial to? How do you choose your barrels?
So we use barrels that are gentle. and we use a mixture of new and used wood.
Okay.
The Taranto is one of my favorites. It's a very. The reason I got to choose my barrels is when I went to Mondavi as I got a little older, the winemaker would let me taste through. They had one of everything. They had all the barrels you can imagine, and we'd taste our wine and other wines through different cooperages and make decisions. And for me, Taranto and Sylvan were always the most gentle on our wine. So through that Mondavi education, I got to see our wines in different things and choose what I thought were the best or the least effective barrels. Because with barrels, I think what you want is, with a new barrel, you get oxygen exchange, so it helps sort of soften the wine and open up and express itself. And then older barrels, those pores in the wood are closed with sediment or things from the previous aging. So how you incorporate oak into your program is very important, and especially those percentages of new versus used, because the last thing I want is to smell a barrel on my wine.
Yes.
I want it to be a completely in sort of uplifting thing, if anything, but I don't want it to obscure the purity.
I just had a thought. You shared something that's very, very special that unfortunately didn't make it on the mic, so I just want to go back to it. You said that the first time, all those years ago, when you tasted your wine for the first time at Mondavi, you said it tasted like home. All this debate about terroir that seems to be quite circular. Terroir is home.
Yeah, it's what you make of it, and it's too often used to glamorize something, and for me it's nothing glamorous. It's that memory of my grandfather and tasting this. The reference you're making is to my tasting at Mondavi when I was tasting my grandfather's wine for the first time that they made out of his block, and it just reminded me of him. It was precise, it was loving, it was complete, it was complex. It really explained to me that wines can be personifications of the people who grew them or make them. And I think when I'm tasting, that's where you go beyond the sort of the technical discussion of flavors to being like, how does this wine make you feel? What is the effect? And I love to bring people by and walk our great grandparents' vines before they ever taste the wine, because once you see those vines, it's impossible to drink the glass and not think about all those tiny little clusters and the struggle that they go through to become what they are.
It is such a powerful emotional connection, and it's so human-like. Life of the vine, in so many ways, mimics human experience. That it's, once you are attached to it, there's no option to look away, to compromise, to cut corners. If you're truly attached, if you have that passion that I see in your eyes, there's no other choice in some ways. And I love the word loving, precise and loving. How cool is that you're able to achieve that? And what I find so extraordinary about your wines is that they're revelations intellectually, but they also have this hedonic qualities that I frankly can't live without. There's something so sensual about them, in the purest sense of it, not in the sexual sense of it, not in the carnal sense, but in the sense that you're being elevated, your senses are being caressed. I don't know how you do this, but it's a rare feat.
Yeah, it's if I had to explain it, I'd just say that's a characteristic of To Kalon. I mean, I feel like wines across this vineyard have this sort of next level of hedonism. And I was explaining earlier, which I think is a relevant story, but the meaning of the word To Kalon is the highest good or the beautiful, but it's as I learned from one of my friends who's a monk at the local monastery. He lives just down the street, and he was telling me, he said, Brother Roger, he said, Graeme, I've discovered the meaning of To Kalon. And so I asked him what he had found, and he said in the Greek Bible, when Jesus is performing his first miracle of turning water into wine, that it's just the wine that Jesus creates is described as the highest good or the beautiful, and that in the Greek Bible is spelled out the To Kalon. And to me, that's just such a incredible hedonistic. There's so many things I would imagine that to taste like. That's again back to that ethereal quality of wine, and I feel like if you capture that and you capture the feeling behind it, you've really succeeded.
I'm dying to delve into the wine itself, but I do have a burning question on when do you feel the wine is ready to be bottled? How do you know? How does it show up to you that yes, we're at that state?
It's interesting. The winemaking process is always a series of. I start to get excited in the barrels when you're tasting them, and certain vintages they really string you out till the end, and you get nervous and you wait, and then you have to make your decision. But I love, like, there's just this moment where everything seems tight and precise, and it doesn't have that like effusive quality. It's not opulent. It's not sort of jumping out of the glass, but everything comes together. So the componentry of the fermentation and the yeast and the malolactic smells and all these things just come together, and the wine just seems perfectly round, if you could describe it as a shape. And at that moment I say, okay, like now we're ready. And so the bottling process of putting them into bottle, as you can imagine, is very disruptive for a wine that's lived in the barrels for 2 years. And so what it does is it adds oxygen as you're bottling, and so that's the moment where the wine then opens up. And so then we usually wait a year before selling the wine, because I feel like I like it to then get back into that reductive state and start to get tighter and denser, because what I love about the wines is when you pour them into your glass and then you wait and you taste them over hours, they just keep changing. And I feel like that's a process of when you decide to bottle.
Wow, this chameleonic nature that you describe, I think, is what is so engaging about the wine. It's unlike any other beverage that way. So back to what's in this glass in front of me, and of course the density of the color even, and I'm a believer in the color. I don't know if you are, there's different schools of thought, but just looking at it, it's like a visual feast. And I've had a sip while we're talking, and the finish on this wine is still going. I think it's been at least a full minute. So it's quite a story in this glass. How is it landing on you?
I love the texture of wines. I think the aromatics are probably one of the things that gets me initially excited, but the texture tells you if it's from a noble place or not. And the ancient Burgundians apparently believe that too. And that's part of, like, you see them like at the tastings with the little silver cups, and there was no way to get the aromatics out of the wine, and so the texture was so much more important. And for us, we have this incredibly rocky site. It's the rockiest portion of the To Kalon Vineyard, and so the vines are incredibly intense, concentrated, and that's why you see that color. That's why you see that tightness. And but then in the palate, what I love is there's so much power, yet it's also light. Like the mid palate is maybe elevated where it seems fresh, and then it's just all power on the finish. And to me, that's what is that mouth-watering quality. It's like you keep wanting to sip it, you keep wanting to try it because of that, like, power and finesse at the same time.
Yeah, so it's boxer's fist in a velvet glove.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And again, it's a testimony to your vineyard work and your mindset in the cellar. And this wine, I'm guessing, will outlive me, and I'd like to think I'm still young. But it has that timeless quality to it that will keep showing up in different iterations. This is a wine that you can have a long conversation with, and it will be seamless because it has so much to say. It's really so precious how you fused intellect and pleasure, and it's just inexplicably, like I said, fused together, that there's no angles to this wine, and it's so young. And the texture that you highlighted, again, I'm so glad you brought it up, because conversations tend to center on the aromatics, but the wine is a story. It's a story of land, it's a story of human intent, And this has beautiful aromatics, and I think they will only flourish. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's, a process that's going to continue to evolve. But it has such a solid foundation texturally in the mid palate. It's like this beautiful symphony of flavors that fan out. And I cannot believe I'm talking about it, because I should be quiet and I should be listening to Graeme. I mean, he nurtured this wine from infancy. So it's not really at all about me waxing poetic, but it's really about the fact that regardless of what the nature delivered in any vintage, you highlighted and you amplified those qualities. Each, we can talk about individual fruit in the flavor profile, but each flavor that I taste, it's like it's turned up a notch. It feels louder. The black fruit is just so harmonic. And it's not loud in the sense of just being that for the sake of it. It's loud in the sense that every quality that is there is showing up in the sense that's not only harmonious, but assertive and confident.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I feel like it's like reading a poem or something. You can either get the feeling from it, or you can dissect it and try to understand all the techniques they used. And the one of the fun things for me, which I always try to capture in the wines, which is a philosophical decision, is the seed of the grape, which is not something that people usually talk about taste wise, but it's when you're extending your maceration on your skins and you've finished fermentation, we do a very long, which is a risky thing, of leaving the grapes on the skins. And what I wait for before I decide to drain the tanks is I want to capture the seed, because the vine has put its entire year into that seed and tried to recreate. So you could see the connections, the legacy, the connection to our family. And so when that comes across in the wine, that's the bitter chocolate. And I feel like that's such a wonderful, powerful thing to be able to capture that in the wine, but then also to be able to explain it. Say this is from the actual, like, the energy where all the vine put its energy throughout the year. So I deeply believe that part of enjoying wine is sort of getting beyond and tasting it over days. And I love to have bottles on the counter and then taste it the next day and think about it. And in our case, it's one of the fun things has been sometimes, or a lot of the times, I'm drinking on the second day. I say, oh, it's even better now. So I think that's what makes it seductive, and that's what makes it exciting.
So your advice, when people are lucky enough to purchase the bottles, would you recommend that any of it is drunk right away? And I say that sheepishly because, we're such instant gratification driven as humans. And I'm the first one to admit that I'm like a cat walking around the box when a bottle shows up that I want to open. Is there any merit to that?
And I'm the same way. When I'm buying other friends' wines, I love to open that first one right away. It doesn't last very long. And then the second one, it's usually a couple years later. And then the last one, I'm finally like, okay, I'm going to hold out as long as I can. And I think the wonderful thing about California wine is there is this incredible approachability to them. And in our wine, part of that is I never include the press wine. So when you're draining a tank, you get the juice that comes out naturally, and then the way to increase your yields and your economics is you then squeeze the rest of the juice out of the grapes, which is when you have a long maceration and when you're shoveling the pumice into a press, it's very oxidative. So it's again, it's a decision, but it brings sort of a more harshness to the wine. So I feel like because we don't include that, the wine has tannin, but it's supple and it's very easy to drink young, which is something we do all the time. And part of the pleasure of drinking a young wine is being able to have all those sensorial qualities that come with youth. And kind of, in many cases, it's a reflection of those early days. And then aging the wine, I think, is one of the great pleasures of wine drinking if you can do it. I don't have very much space to be storing it, so luckily we found areas for our library, but for our personal wines, it's always a challenge to age. But I always feel like it's a reward also.
Absolutely. What are some of your biggest hopes for the future? Like looking ahead, as a wine industry, as a a participant in a craft that's, subjective and often misunderstood and misinterpreted. What are your thoughts on that? What does the future look like to you?
And my hope, first of all, would be acceptance of all the different styles, and that there's less provincial power within the industry to dictate how things should taste. And I feel like that leads you, then the next step is philosophical thought, and people that are thinking outside the box or pushing the limits. And it's what makes Napa Valley so interesting and American wine so great is that innovation. And I hope more than anything that people accept that. And in that process, I think remembering the history and not always trying to live in the present. Sometimes you have to live thinking about the past and use that to affect how you decide in the future. And I think the lessons we're learning in farming, in what we use to farm, how we do it, the culture is a big thing for me. My ultimate hope is in our family is that we create a culture, my brother and I, that then the kids, they'll hate it when they're teenagers and they'll go travel the world, but eventually they'll come back and say, well, that's what everything else is missing. So I do hope that Napa continues to foster a culture of young winemakers, of sharing information, improving, and being open-minded.
And I hear a lot of optimism in what you're saying. The world at large, I think we're becoming somewhat jaded because we're so far removed from the land and its pleasures and its trials and tribulations. We live in virtual reality often. And because you're so connected to the original source, you get your hands in it, you touch the leaves. And again, it's highly relational experience. I think you're so much closer to the truth. And that truth, from what you described, is quite simple. It's really honoring those that came before you and who you are and who you evolve into as a human being, and expressing it to the craft that you feel so much passion and love for. And then it winds up on someone's table, and at that moment, they're part of this. While they're tasting your, partaking in your wine and sharing it, by osmosis, again, there's that transference of them being a part of this cycle.
And the only way we're able to make wines like this is because our great-grandparents planted the vines and our granddad planted the vines. And so for me, that multi-generational aspect of growing grapes and being part of this is so interesting. And I think I have some friends who are developing projects for the first time, doing things, and I'm always the person who says, oh yeah, well, you're doing great things for your children and for your grandchildren. So make sure not to always, it's exciting, but I love that we have a foundation that was built for us, and you have to understand and appreciate that. We could succumb to the ideas that we should rip out our great-grandparents' vines and make another ton or two per acre by doing so. But then in doing that, we lose our connection to them, and we lose our sort of connection to those generational aspects of grape growing. And so I truly believe that you have to look back, and you have to appreciate that you're part of something bigger than just a lifetime. I feel like I gain comfort in that, because if I convinced myself that I only had 20, 30, 40 vintages to work and to make, and you get one chance a year to make all those decisions, that I would not be stable mentally because I'd be so worried, which I already worry plenty about the wine. And I just feel like having that ability to have confidence that I know how people before me made it. I know what worked, what didn't. You build upon that foundation instead of recreating it every generation.
What a powerful thought that is. If you just take a moment and think, each one of us asking ourselves a question: what would my grandchildren think of what I'm doing today? Thank you so much for such impactful storytelling. I truly hope there's a book forthcoming, or perhaps even more than one. You're a true sage of life and wine, and it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you this afternoon.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you guys for all your support.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure featuring Ilona Thompson. We'll see you again next week.